Welcome to the New Shooter 101 Instructors Clinic. Thanks for watching. The purpose of this forum is to provide firearms instructors with a place to exchange ideas for training beginners in defensive handgun skills. Today's topic is credentialed versus competent. What qualifications are needed to train beginners? This is organized as a panel discussion where you're going to hear a number of different viewpoints about this. Today we're talking with Jeff Bickford, Doreen Sarles, Wu Chin, and Gary Larkin. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We're all firearms instructors with ADTA, which is the Armed Defense Training Association. We're a nonprofit gun club located near Seattle, Washington, now in its 11th year. So I want to start this conversation by voicing my own personal belief about this. And I believe that anyone with minimal qualifications can teach defensive shooting to beginners. And I have a little list of qualifications here I'm going to go over. Safety training, skills training. I don't think there's any need for a really long list of what I'm going to put in air quote of credentials to be able to do this. Of course, you need to be able to legally own firearms. And also want to inject the idea that you kind of need the courage to be able to go out there and lead firearms training classes in a political climate that tries to suppress firearms ownership. So the first item on the list that I just went over was about safety training. I personally think that's essential, and I'd like to hear what you guys think. What should the level of safety training be? Wu, you want to lead that on that?
Yeah, please. Having been lead, or I should say chief range safety officer for ADTA for a number of years and such, safety certainly is very important to our organization, especially handling with live fire, with ammunition at the range, and we have a number of people involved. You got to make sure that you know where your muzzle is and know which direction you'll be pointing your gun at. Most of the other organizations that we deal with, the ranges especially, required NRA certified range safety officer for us to be involved in their bays. So that's the minimum that most of the organizations required. Now, we as ADTA have our own training program as well. And what we do is, like myself, we're NRA trained, and we in ADTA operate differently in some areas. And so we kind of came up with our own program based on the NRA program. So those are the rules that we use for our events, and that's what we drum into our members when we go to our events. Now we have a number of NRA RSOs, and they also qualify as ADTA RSOs. So we always have at least one, sometimes more than one RSO at each of our events. So it's very important. At the very beginning of the events, we go through the protocol as far as the 4 safety rules, identify the exits, etc. And we also have what we call safeties. And those are the people who will be behind the people that are on the line to make sure that they are acting properly and safely in gun handling on the line. Anybody else want to add on to it?
Yeah, so I am one of those NRA trained RSOs. I can vouch for ADTA in saying that the ADTA program covers everything that the NRA RSO program covers, plus quite a bit more. So it is much more comprehensive than the NRA version of the training. The use of safeties, the first time I was exposed to that was with ADTA. I've been through other outside training, also using open bays, and the way we use our safeties works well with our training format, with a few people up on the line and the safeties behind. So you have eyeballs on every single one that has a firearm in their hand. I really like the format. It works well.
So maybe somebody could expound a little bit more about the line of safeties behind the firing line of shooters.
I'll jump onto that. So during our live fire events and even our dry fire events, what we do is have the next set of shooters behind the active people that are participating on the line. And their main role there is to make sure the shooter is not doing anything unsafe. That includes muzzle direction, indexing when they're not on target, when they reholster their firearm, make sure there's no clothing that gets snagged. Basically it's another layer to reinforce the safety aspects to the trainees. As well as that, they get another level of repetition of seeing what's going on the line. It helps them become better shooters at the next bit. That's kind of a side effect. But ultimately, that really needs to be the basis. Training or safety needs to be the basis of any training that you're doing with firearms, because you want that to be instilled in people at the onset, so that it just becomes a habit and they do stuff like index when they're not on target automatically without even thinking about it.
Yeah, so we really have two levels of overall safety in an event. You have the RSO overseeing the whole event, and then you have the shooting line safeties or dry fire line safeties, then supervising the safety vis-a-vis the person right in front of them.
Yeah, that's one thing about our safeties is that they concentrate only on the person that they are being a safety for.
Yeah.
And they kind of overlook at all the other areas, just in case we have a ceasefire situation or unsafe situation, then they can step in and help.
So I've taught a number of the beginners classes, and one thing I always ask at the end of the class, I've got them all sat down in front of you after they've gone through all this, and say, did you feel safe during this event? And my experience has been that the answer is generally yes, because of the levels of safety we're talking about here. And I think that's reflected well on our competence in training beginners. So let's move along to, the next item that was on my list when I outlined it was about skills training. Okay, so this is a pretty big discussion. Who'd like to lead that one off?
So about skills training and what level of skill an instructor needs to be in order to train others. In reality, and luckily informal training, you just need to be a step or two ahead of the people that you're training. Being at a shooting booth at the range, helping someone. But if you're teaching a class, you at least need to be competent in the things that you're instructing. So if you've only practiced low light training a couple times, probably should be a little more trained into it before trying to teach others. Definitely. Sometimes we hesitate in helping others to get better when all we got to be is a couple of steps ahead of where they are, and as long as we're competent in it.
Well, they say that teaching others helps you hone your own skills, because you really, like you're saying, you really need to know it. Yeah. Once you get there.
Yeah, oftentimes you may learn what you don't know on a particular item, and never be afraid to just say, I wasn't sure about that, but I'll do some research and get back to you. but follow through if it's something that you're not aware of. Nobody's an expert in everything. But yeah, to carry on to Gary's comments, things that you would want to do for training a beginner up to a more skill level person. Absolutely. One, start with safety. Then need to be good grip, stance, trigger control. All of that discipline is really good. From there, you move on to drawing from the holster. That's an excellent skill that you need to be able to master before you can try to teach somebody else. And that's kind of the next progression before you get into the some of the more advanced skills.
So
One of the
ADTA.
things-
Oh, go ahead, Wu.
One of the things here, of course, is knowing how you present your pistol or how you do a skill. The other thing is you have to really recognize the fact that the students may or may not have that ability because of, say, limitations, physical limitations, handicaps and that kind of stuff. So you really got to be careful how you present that and be cognizant of what your students' capabilities are, and then work, the skill at their level.
So ADTA has got what we call certification programs for shooters. First is safe shooter. The second is defensive shooter, which safe shooter being firearm skills that you do while you're standing still, and defensive shooter is more dynamic skills. And we generally want anyone who's going to do any kind of instruction for us to have mastered both these programs. So maybe one of you could kind of outline what some of those skills are and how they help an instructor in training beginners. Doreen, you want to talk about that?
I'm trying to remember what was all listed on that first sign-up card.
You don't have to remember the card. We have sign-up cards for that. But just what are some of the skills, particularly defensive shooter skills, that come to mind that are going to apply to training people?
Well, pretty much all of them do. Safe shooter, it's I guess you go into the grip and the aim, how to present from a holster. These are things that we're going to do, when we go live, no matter what. When you get to defensive, then we break it down to the more, the low light shooting, I guess, drawing out of concealment, behind cover. They're all skills that we'll be using on a regular basis, I guess.
Gary, you had a couple more to add?
Yeah, malfunctions, getting off of X,
Yeah.
and then shooting behind cover and concealment.
And also, different positions that are not normal, like shooting from prone, supine, kneeling positions and such. And
movement. As Ed said, you need to know how to do this stuff while moving and, not crossing your feet over and tripping.
Exactly, without tripping. So what do you think the benefit of any advanced training, like beyond that? Because there's always a say, well, you need more training, you need to be much more qualified. So what are the thoughts about that? Do our instructors need to be going to full day classes somewhere, or is what we're giving them sufficient?
Well, I think that's where there's a lot of debate. Ultimately, as an instructor, you would always want to better yourself. It makes you a more knowledgeable person to help a broader range of people. I guess that's part of the debate. Learning new skills is always good. At some point, if a instructor only goes to a certain level and say never progresses beyond a defensive shooter, ADTA defensive shooter certification, then they're more or less have some cap on where they can probably go with presenting that same material to others. That doesn't mean they can't go learn something else, organically. But of course, structured courses are always a good thing.
Well, and then there's always some discussion about your background. Like, for example, experienced shooters may come from military or from law enforcement or from competition, all of which would bring additional skills into it, but maybe not skills that are directly beneficial to a beginner. Do you think that those kinds of backgrounds make any difference?
I think there's also some limitations on coming with those skills because, like IDPA and such, they require you to do certain things before you can move, or you have to go back to cover to do map changes, etc. I mean, those are good skills to have, but there's sometimes, when you're with our type of training and trying to extrapolate that into self-defense training, it's got to be more open. They're going to have a lot more freedom to do what they need to do in order to survive. And this is something that I don't think some of those competitions provide you that, because they provide limitations or they impose limitations on you.
Well, I think on the competition level, there's some maneuvers that you do in competition that can actually be damaging to training on the defensive side. Say like when they force a reload between stations, you're doing supposedly an emergency reload on the run, but you actually have a round chambered and your gun's not locked open when you're. So what I try to do in competition, and it's not really true competition, and I'm not being graded and scored, and I don't really care. I'm just there to kind of see how I time in the end. Is on the emergency reloads, I will go ahead and rack the slide anyways, just so I don't untrain myself how to do an emergency reload. So, what they do in competition completely undoes what your defensive emergency reload training is. And then also shooting from behind cover. In competition, you're not shooting from behind cover. You're reaching around cover to make a shot. You're not treating it like somebody's shooting back at you. So you don't really care that you're covered. You're just trying to shoot around it. So there's things that don't really match up on the defensive side. The nice skills that I have, being able to run from one station to another and quickly get off a shot, but not really realistic when you try and tie that to a gunfight of some sort.
When we're talking about, skill set to be able to instruct others, one thing to keep in mind too is that you should at least touch on other forms of self-defense to keep a holistic approach to self-defense in mind. So as you're looking at what other training that you can have besides, just firearm training, is to at least have enough to expose your students to other forms of self-defense, so that they have options and that they have, so the only tool in the toolbox is not just the firearm, to keep a holistic approach to it.
Let's go into another aspect of training beginners, and this is really the idea of knowing your students and talking to their level. And Wu, did you want to lead that one off?
Yeah, sure. What I'm looking at here is kind of relating back to my martial arts training, and when I'm training students in karate or judo or whatever, that they come in with certain experiences or expectations, etc. And the first thing I need to do as an instructor is to identify their strengths and weaknesses, and then provide the training to their level of expertise, let's say, or their experience. It's the same thing with firearms training. What we're looking at is people coming into us, let's say if they're ex-military or ex-law enforcement, they're at a much higher level of expertise, and we can certainly talk to them at a much higher level. We have a beginner that might come in here, and basically they're a novice, and so you have to explain to them the parts of the gun, for instance, and then you progress from there. So knowing your students and coming down to their level of experience and teaching them, and then help bring them up to the level that you really want them to be. That's the key part of teaching them. Anyone else?
Yeah, if I can jump in and throw my 2 cents on that. So just going along with what you're saying, Wu, about understanding people's level, especially if they've had past experience. It's not uncommon that we get someone in that says, "Oh yeah, I've been shooting all my life," and then you learn what their experience is, and the first thing you have to do is identify all of the bad habits that they've learned over time.
Really?
And then it becomes sort of a delicate issue of how do we untrain them and basically tell them, yeah, you shouldn't be teacupping and shooting with one hand while standing on one foot, whatever, especially when it's unsafe characteristics and things that are just not good standards today. You need to be patient with them. Absolutely. I mean, the worst thing you can do is when a student is or a trainee is having difficulty with something and you start getting frustrated with it. So it really takes, you need to put yourself in a position where you have to be patient with them to help them progress, because if you're not having a good time, you can guarantee they're not going to be having a good time either.
Well,
Patience is a virtue.
I consider myself a pretty new shooter. I've only started shooting. I had my first gun not even 2.5 years ago, and me, no experience. The boyfriend, lifetime shooter. Oh, I'll teach you. I decided that I was going to go ahead and get some professional training before I got my gun. He decided to train along with me, so he joined every single beginner course with me. They identified his bad habits real fast. He's a hunter. The first, of course, the stance that he would take shooting a pistol would be that Weaver stance, and basically a slap on the wrist there. Big no-no for most beginner classes. So he learned a lot, but it's nice that we actually got to learn at the same speed and are kind of at the same level now. He knows how I was taught, and I know how he was taught now, kind of both ways that he was taught growing up like that, and then also in the classes. So very interesting though. But I also, the more experienced students, I think, appreciate and they have to acknowledge that they are in a beginner class when they sign up with ADTA, and it's okay to go step through the parts of the gun. Hey, that's they need to expect that we're it's a mixed class, and we're starting from scratch. I don't think it's a horrible thing to skip over, to not skip over those things and really get down to basics and start from nothing.
Well, as instructors too, we learn from the more experienced people coming into us. They may have a totally different take on how to perform a technique. And sometimes I found that it's more efficient, and I'm willing to, adjust to that as well. There are times we tell the students, well, we know that you got all this training and this is how you do things, but would you just humor us and do it our way for now?
Right.
Okay. So that we all are on the same level. So yeah, that's one of the things as instructors, you need to be flexible and to recognize that the other people have ways of doing things that's for them is more efficient for them, but just ask them to humor us.
Yeah, what's that old saying? There's the right way, there's the wrong way, and there's our way.
Our way.
I try to remind them. I wanted to bring up something here that I call the instructor's dilemma or the expert's dilemma. and this would be true of expert in any kind of field, and that's really that they know too much, and they have a difficulty bringing themselves down to the level of being a beginner, because it seems like they've forgotten what it was like to be a beginner. So, Gary, you're smiling.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's partly self-discipline, to not get on rabbit trails of more advanced things than where the class that you're trying to target is at. And I think Wu had mentioned on that, to know the level of your audience. So that's definitely a good self-discipline skill of an instructor, is to have an outline, have an idea of what you're going to say and what you're not going to say, or what to put on hold for a future class for things that are a little more advanced.
Yeah, using terms of art that are not applicable for the content that you're training them in is one of those, I think, trips us up occasionally, because, okay, you've just defined something. Now, what does that mean? And so we really have to do some self-checking there to stay on track. Again, don't introduce something that's probably not applicable to the level that you're dealing with.
Well, yeah, and I remember the example from when you were showing them how to shoot from behind cover, and you said, "Now watch me slice the pie." And they're all looking at each other, wondering if it's snack time, So, but to your credit, we did explain it,
and I forgot the pie.
So I wanted to interject a couple more ideas here, and a number of us have participated in the training classes that we have run for potential new instructors. And one of the values of those classes that I think we lent to them was giving the public speaking training, where we were teaching potential instructors about voice inflection and phrasing and so on and so forth, kind of stuff that you might learn if you're going to Toastmasters meetings. And also the value of practice time in front of a live audience, which I think is essential. So now
that's one of the reasons, Ed, why we have beginning instructors or wannabe instructors. We put them through some small training program where they get up and lead a drill. And that way it gives them an opportunity to stand up in front of the group. And the nice thing here too is that as ADTA is concerned, we're a family, and we all know each other, and we support each other. That's the beautiful part of this. So you get up, you give your presentation, we give you positive feedback and constructive feedback, and you can move on from there. And if you don't feel comfortable with it, you don't have to continue with it, but we give you an opportunity, and we'd love to have you continue with us if you love to do that.
I think that's a great wrap up for this segment. Anybody else want to add anything? And what I want to do is then kind of go around the table here, and not to put you on the spot, but to really hear from each of you in your own words. What do you think the requirements are? I mean, what do you think are the most important things? You don't have to run through them all. Just, what stands out to you? And Jeff, you want to start with that?
Sure. Well, I think we started out in the right spot, and that's an adherence to safety. That really needs to be ingrained from day one. And if you as the instructor aren't adhering to those safety principles and cautioning or bringing it to the trainees' attention when they're doing something unsafe, again, that just needs to be automatic. After that, don't teach anything that's over you. If it's not something that and you haven't tried it over and over again, it's not something that you should be presenting.
Doreen?
Well, again, safety, absolutely number one. And before we came online, we discussed competent versus credentialed as far as what we would think is necessary. I got so I'm a trained RSO certified pistol instructor. I did that for my own, self, improvement. Do I think it's needed for ADTA? Absolutely not. Is it helpful? For me, it is, just in kind of knowing everything that I should cover when teaching an ADTA beginners class. And I think our beginners class is fine. But as we all know, NRA has their own way of doing things. So if I was to teach an NRA pistol course, it would have to be their very specific, 8-hour pistol course. But I don't think it's being credentialed is all that important. And knowing your stuff is more important than anything, and that doesn't mean you need a label or some type of certification.
Gary?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Jeff was saying. If on one hand, don't hold back from helping others if you are a little further along in their self-defense journey than they are. But realize the gravity of what you're putting out there. You're talk about firearms. When you introduce a firearm to any situation, you're potentially escalating a situation as well as potentially saving your life. But it's serious business. So on one hand, don't hold back in helping others. On the other hand, make sure you know what you're talking about because there's some serious ramifications if what you're telling people is not correct.
Woo?
Well, to piggyback on everybody else's comments here, ADTA has our progression. We talked about the safe shooter, defensive shooter, and our next level is range safety officer. And to be an instructor, you have to be a range safety officer before you move on. So we have that safety built into our program. We also have our range instructor program developed, and many of the people here have gone through that. And the thing here is we go through a class program, and then we have a dry fire practical, and then from there we do live fire practice there. So to qualify as the ADTA instructor, we go through that certification program. Credential wise, we're not asking people to go out and get training elsewhere. If you bring that back to us, we would love it, and we want you to be able to instruct what you learn to benefit us. And I know Doreen has done that from other training that she's gotten, and came in and did live fire in our programs, and we benefit from that experience. So thank you.
Thanks for watching this video. We really appreciate it. Our motivation for making these videos is to start conversations with other firearms instructors who are training beginners. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share with us? If so, please let us know in the comments below. And if you like what you saw, please click on the like button and consider subscribing to our channel. Thanks again to our instructors for participating in this discussion, and thank you for watching. Hope to see you at the range.